Sarah Martinez stepped through the heavy glass doors of Lincoln High School, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder and her father's old military dog tags tucked safely beneath her shirt. The hallways buzzed with the familiar chaos of teenage life. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking against polished floors, and the constant hum of conversations that seemed to pause as she walked by. She had moved 6 times in the past 4 years, following her mother from base to base, city to city, always the outsider looking in. At 17, Sarah had perfected the art of blending into the background, of making herself invisible until she could figure out the social landscape of yet another new school. But Lincoln High felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, or perhaps it was simply her exhaustion with constantly starting over. Whatever it was, Sarah found herself walking with her shoulders back, her chin raised just a fraction higher than usual. Her first period was advanced physics, and she slipped into an empty desk near the middle of the classroom. The teacher, Mr. Henderson, was a kind-looking man in his 50s who welcomed her warmly and introduced her to the class without making a big spectacle. A few students offered polite smiles, and Sarah began to think that maybe, just maybe, this transition would be easier than the others. It was during lunch that everything changed. Sarah sat alone at a corner table, quietly eating the sandwich she had packed that morning while reviewing her afternoon class schedule. The cafeteria was a typical high school ecosystem, distinct groups clustered at their territorial tables. The popular kids holding court near the center, athletes dominating one side, and various other social circles scattered throughout. She didn't notice them approaching until they were already standing beside her table. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The voice belonged to Madison Pierce, a tall blonde girl whose designer clothes and confident posture marked her as someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Behind her stood 3 other girls, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Sarah looked up calmly, her dark eyes meeting Madison's blue ones without flinching. "Just eating lunch," she replied simply, her voice steady despite the warning bells going off in her head. Madison's smile was sharp as a blade. "This is our table, actually. Has been for 3 years. Didn't anyone tell you?" The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that some nearby students actually turned to look, as if there might be truth to the claim. Sarah glanced around the table, noting the absence of any personal belongings or signs of regular occupancy. She had chosen this spot precisely because it seemed unused, out of the way. But she also recognized the game being played here, the testing of the new girl, the establishment of hierarchy, the subtle power play that happened in schools everywhere. "I didn't see any names on it," Sarah responded, keeping her tone neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting emotionally to provocateurs only escalated situations unnecessarily. One of Madison's friends, a red-haired girl named Jessica, laughed mockingly. "Oh, she's got attitude. How cute." The comment was loud enough to draw more attention from surrounding tables. Madison leaned forward, placing her palms flat on the table surface. "Here's how things work at Lincoln, new girl. There's an order to things, a way we do stuff. And part of that means showing proper respect to people who've earned their place here." Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her now. Conversations had died down as students sensed drama brewing. She recognized the moment for what it was, a crossroads where she could either submit to maintain peace or stand her ground and face whatever consequences followed. But there was something these girls didn't know about Sarah Martinez, something hidden beneath her quiet demeanor and careful composure. For the past 2 summers, while other teenagers were working retail jobs or lounging at beaches, Sarah had been training. Her father, Master Chief Rodriguez, had insisted that she learn to defend herself, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. The training had been intense, grueling, and transformative. She had learned hand-to-hand combat, strategic thinking, and most importantly, how to remain calm under pressure. Her father's military friends had taught her techniques used by elite forces, preparing her for any situation where she might need to protect herself or others. But more than the physical skills, they had instilled in her a code of honor. To use her abilities only when absolutely necessary, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and to never initiate violence but to be prepared to end it if forced. Standing slowly, Sarah picked up her backpack and looked directly at Madison. "I understand you're trying to establish some kind of hierarchy here," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "But I'm not interested in playing those games. I just want to eat my lunch in peace and get through my first day without any drama." Madison's eyes flashed with anger at what she perceived as dismissal. "Nobody walks away from me when I'm talking to them," she snapped, reaching out to grab Sarah's wrist. The moment Madison's fingers made contact, Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Moving with fluid precision, she gently but firmly twisted her wrist, breaking the grip while simultaneously stepping back to create distance. The movement was so quick and smooth that most observers barely registered what had happened, seeing only that Madison was suddenly empty-handed and slightly off balance. "Don't touch me," Sarah said, her voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "I asked nicely to be left alone." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the lunch staff had stopped their work to watch the unfolding confrontation. Madison's face flushed red with embarrassment and rage at being handled so effortlessly in front of the entire school. "You think you're tough?" Madison hissed, her voice rising. "You have no idea who you're messing with. This isn't over, not even close." Sarah simply nodded acknowledgement and turned to walk away, her movements controlled and purposeful. But as she reached the cafeteria doors, Madison's voice rang out behind her, venomous with humiliation and fury. "Enjoy it while it lasts, freak. Tomorrow's going to be very different for you." As Sarah pushed through the doors into the hallway, she caught her reflection in the glass. Her father's dog tags had somehow worked their way out from beneath her shirt during the confrontation, the military insignia catching the fluorescent light. She tucked them back carefully, knowing that her quiet attempt to blend in had just become impossible. Walking toward her next class, Sarah's mind was already working, analyzing the situation from multiple angles just as her training had taught her. Madison Pierce clearly wielded significant social power at Lincoln High, and making an enemy of her on the first day was going to complicate things considerably. But Sarah had faced worse than high school bullies. She had been through survival training in harsh conditions, had learned to navigate complex social situations in military communities, and had developed an inner strength that couldn't be shaken by teenage politics. As she entered her history classroom, Sarah made a mental note to stay alert and prepared. She had hoped for a peaceful transition to yet another new school, but it seemed that once again she would have to prove herself worthy of basic respect and dignity. What Madison and her followers didn't realize was that they had just challenged someone whose definition of strength went far beyond social manipulation and peer pressure. Sarah Martinez had been forged by experiences that would have broken most people her age, and she was prepared for whatever came next. The first day was ending, but Sarah sensed it was really just the beginning of something much more significant. As she gathered her books and prepared to face whatever challenges awaited her tomorrow, she silently promised herself that she would handle whatever came with grace, strength, and the honor her father had instilled in her. The dog tags against her chest felt warm with the memory of his words. "Strength isn't about dominating others, Mika. It's about protecting what matters and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." Tomorrow would test those words in ways Sarah was only beginning to understand. The next morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep through the windows of Sarah's small apartment. She dressed carefully in jeans and a simple gray sweater, braiding her long dark hair into a practical plait that kept it away from her face. As she laced up her sturdy boots, she could hear her mother moving around the kitchen, preparing for another 12-hour shift at the hospital. "How was your first day, Mija?" her mother called out, the concern evident in her voice despite her attempt at casual conversation. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Rosa Martinez had enough worries with her demanding job as an emergency room nurse and their constant relocations. Adding teenage drama to her mother's burdens felt unnecessary, especially when Sarah was confident she could handle the situation herself. "It was fine, Mama. Just the usual new school adjustments," she replied, grabbing an apple from the counter and kissing her mother's cheek goodbye. The walk to Lincoln High took 15 minutes, and Sarah used the time to center herself mentally. Her father had taught her that preparation was half the battle in any conflict, and she had spent the previous evening researching the school's layout, policies, and even some background on Madison Pierce through social media. What she had discovered was both predictable and concerning. Madison was indeed a person of influence at Lincoln High, daughter of a prominent local businessman, captain of the debate team, and according to multiple posts, someone accustomed to getting her way through a combination of charisma and intimidation. But Sarah had also noticed something else in her research. Several students had posted cryptic messages over the past few months about staying out of Madison's way and not becoming a target. There were hints of previous conflicts that had ended badly for those who crossed her. Sarah realized she had stumbled into a situation that went far deeper than typical high school social dynamics. As she approached the school entrance, Sarah immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. Conversations stopped as she passed, and she could feel the weight of curious and nervous glances. Word of yesterday's cafeteria incident had clearly spread, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Her first 3 classes passed without incident. Sarah kept to herself, participated appropriately in discussions, and maintained the careful neutrality she had perfected over years of being the new student. But she remained alert, watching for signs of the promised retaliation. It came during 4th period. Sarah was in the middle of a chemistry lab, carefully measuring solutions with her assigned partner, David Kim, a quiet boy who seemed genuinely interested in helping her catch up on the coursework they had covered before her arrival. They were working well together, discussing molecular structures and balancing equations, when Mrs. Peterson stepped out of the classroom to handle an administrative matter. The moment the teacher disappeared, Madison and her 3 closest followers entered the lab through the back door. Several students immediately found excuses to move to the far side of the room, clearly recognizing the signs of impending trouble. "Well, if it isn't our brave little newcomer," Madison announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hope you slept well last night because today's going to be educational." Sarah continued measuring her solution with steady hands, not acknowledging the intrusion. David, however, shifted nervously beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the developing situation. "I'm talking to you," Madison snapped, stepping closer to Sarah's lab station. "When someone speaks to you at this school, you respond. It's called basic manners." Finally looking up, Sarah met Madison's gaze calmly. "Is there something you need help with?" "We're trying to complete our assignment before Mrs. Peterson returns." Madison's smile was predatory. "Oh, I think there's definitely something you need help with. See, yesterday you embarrassed me in front of the entire school. That was a mistake that needs to be corrected." Sarah set down her measuring cylinder carefully and turned to face Madison fully. She could see that the other girls' followers had positioned themselves strategically around the lab stations, blocking potential exit routes. The remaining students in the classroom had gone completely silent, some pulling out phones to record what they sensed was about to become a significant incident. "I didn't embarrass you," Sarah said evenly. "I asked to be left alone. And when you grabbed me without permission, I removed your hand. That's not embarrassment, that's consequence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Madison's carefully controlled facade cracked slightly, revealing the anger burning beneath her polished exterior. Consequence? Madison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Let me tell you about consequences, new girl. Jessica, show her what happened to the last person who thought they were too good for our school's social structure. Jessica stepped forward, pulling up something on her phone. She turned the screen towards Sarah, displaying what appeared to be social media posts about a student named Marcus Chen. The posts were vicious, filled with fabricated stories about cheating, stealing, and other character assassinations. As Sarah scrolled through them, she realized she was looking at a systematic campaign designed to destroy someone's reputation both at school and in the broader community. Marcus transferred to a different school district after 2 weeks of this, Madison said with obvious satisfaction. His family had to move because people started believing the stories. That's what happens when people don't understand how things work around here. David made a small sound of distress beside Sarah. She realized he had probably witnessed Marcus's treatment firsthand, explaining his nervousness about being associated with her in this moment. Sarah handed the phone back to Jessica, her expression unchanged. So you're showing me that you and your friends enjoy destroying people's lives when they don't submit to your bullying? Is that supposed to frighten me into compliance? The directness of her response clearly caught Madison off guard. She had expected fear, anger, or perhaps pleading. Instead, Sarah stood calmly analyzing the situation as if it were just another problem to be solved. "It should frighten you," Madison hissed, stepping close enough that Sarah could smell her expensive perfume. "Because tomorrow morning, everyone in this school is going to see posts about what a freak you really are, about how you attacked me yesterday without provocation, about how you've been kicked out of multiple schools for violent behavior." Sarah considered this threat carefully. She had faced psychological warfare before, during the advanced training scenarios her father's colleagues had put her through. They had taught her that information could be weaponized just as effectively as physical force, and that the best defense against lies was often truth presented strategically. "That's interesting," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "You're planning to create false narratives about me and distribute them through social media. But I'm curious about something. Have you considered what might happen if people discovered evidence of you and your friends deliberately fabricating those stories?" Madison's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Sarah gestured slightly toward the students who had been recording the confrontation with their phones. "Well, right now there are several people documenting this conversation where you just admitted to creating false stories about Marcus Chen and threatened to do the same to me. Plus, you confessed to having fabricated the story about attacking you yesterday, since we both know I only defended myself when you grabbed me without permission." The confidence in Madison's expression wavered slightly as she glanced around the room, noticing for the first time how many phones were pointed in their direction. "But more importantly," Sarah continued, her voice remaining calm and educational, "cyberbullying and defamation are actually criminal offenses in this state, especially when they involve minors in schools. I looked it up last night. The penalties can include significant fines and even criminal charges for the perpetrators and their parents." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Madison, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Madison snapped, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. She was clearly trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from her. Sarah sensed the shift and pressed forward carefully. "I'm not interested in causing problems for anyone. I just want to attend school, learn, and be left alone. But if you continue down this path of harassment and threats, I'll be forced to protect myself using every legal and ethical means available to me." The classroom door opened as Mrs. Peterson returned, immediately sensing the tension in the room. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her experienced teacher's instincts clearly alerting her that something significant had been happening in her absence. Madison quickly composed herself, flashing her practiced smile. "Of course, Mrs. Peterson. We were just welcoming Sarah and helping her understand how our lab partnerships work." But Sarah could see the calculation in Madison's eyes, the wheels turning as she processed this unexpected turn of events. This wasn't going according to her usual script, and for someone accustomed to easy victories, that was clearly unsettling. As the class resumed their lab work, Madison and her followers retreated, but not before Madison leaned close to Sarah's ear and whispered, "This isn't over. Not even close." Sarah simply nodded and returned to her chemistry assignment. But her mind was already working several steps ahead. She recognized that Madison Pierce wasn't going to be deterred by legal threats or recorded evidence. Someone with her level of social power and apparent history of success with intimidation tactics would likely escalate rather than retreat. As she mixed her solutions and recorded her observations, Sarah found herself thinking about her father's advice regarding asymmetric conflicts, situations where opponents had different strengths and weaknesses that required creative solutions. Madison had social power, financial resources, and an established network of allies. But Sarah had something different. Genuine strength forged through real challenges, strategic thinking developed through military-style training, and most importantly, principles that couldn't be compromised through fear or pressure. The bell rang, ending the period, and as students filed out of the classroom, David finally spoke up quietly. "You should be careful. Madison doesn't usually back down, and when she gets really angry, things can get pretty intense." Sarah appreciated his concern, but she also heard the resignation in his voice, the acceptance that Madison's behavior was simply a fact of life at Lincoln High, something to be endured rather than challenged. "Has anyone ever actually stood up to her before?" Sarah asked as they gathered their books. David considered the question seriously. "A few people have tried, but they usually end up transferring or just keeping their heads down until graduation. She's really good at making people's lives miserable." As Sarah walked toward her next class, she reflected on David's words. It seemed that Madison's power came not just from her own actions, but from a collective acceptance that resistance was futile. Students had internalized the belief that challenging her was more costly than simply submitting to her authority. But Sarah had learned something different during her training. She had learned that systems of oppression only worked when good people chose not to resist them. And while she had no interest in becoming a crusader or creating unnecessary drama, she also couldn't simply stand by and watch other students live in fear. The afternoon passed quietly, but Sarah could feel the anticipation building around her. Students whispered in hallways, teachers seemed more alert than usual, and there was a general sense that everyone was waiting for something significant to happen. As the final bell rang and students began heading home, Sarah realized that her attempt to blend in and avoid conflict had failed completely. Whether she liked it or not, she had become a central figure in Lincoln High's social dynamics, and Madison Pierce wasn't going to let her exist peacefully on the sidelines. Walking toward her locker to gather her homework materials, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't initiate conflict, but she also wouldn't run from it. If Madison wanted to escalate this situation, Sarah would be ready to meet whatever came next with the same calm strength that had carried her through far more serious challenges than high school politics. Tomorrow would bring new tests of her resolve, and Sarah Martinez was prepared to face them with honor and courage, just as her father had taught her. The third day at Lincoln High began with an ominous silence that Sarah recognized immediately. As she approached the school entrance, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and students stepped aside to create clear pathways in front of her. The usual morning chaos of teenagers rushing to lockers and classes had been replaced by something that felt more like a scene from an old Western movie. The calm before a showdown. Sarah's phone had been buzzing since 6 that morning with notifications from social media platforms she barely used. Madison had made good on her threats, creating a sophisticated campaign of character assassination that painted Sarah as a dangerous transfer student with a history of violence and academic dishonesty. The fabricated stories were detailed and convincing, complete with fake screenshots and testimonials from supposed former classmates at schools Sarah had never attended. But something unexpected had happened overnight that Madison clearly hadn't anticipated. As Sarah walked through the hallways, she began to notice small gestures of support. David Kim caught her eye and nodded respectfully. A girl from her physics class smiled encouragingly. Several students she had never spoken to made eye contact and offered subtle thumbs-up signs. It seemed that while Madison had been busy creating her false narrative, other students had been conducting their own investigation into the truth. The turning point came when Sarah reached her locker and found Marcus Chen waiting for her. Marcus was a senior who had transferred back to Lincoln High just 2 weeks earlier, despite Madison's previous campaign against him. He was taller than Sarah had expected from Jessica's photos, with a quiet confidence that suggested someone who had survived something difficult and emerged stronger. "Sarah Martinez?" he asked, extending his hand formally. "I'm Marcus Chen. I think we need to talk." They found a quiet corner near the library where Marcus explained what had been happening behind the scenes. After leaving Lincoln High the previous semester, he had spent months documenting Madison's cyberbullying tactics with the help of his new school's counseling staff and his parents' attorney. He had been building a comprehensive case against her systematic harassment of multiple students, waiting for the right moment to present it to school authorities. "When I heard about what happened to you yesterday, I realized she was following the exact same pattern," Marcus explained, showing Sarah a thick folder of printed evidence. Screenshots, witness statements, documentation of her methods. The problem was, I needed someone who was willing to stand up to her publicly so that other students would feel safe coming forward as witnesses. Sarah studied the documentation, recognizing the sophisticated nature of Marcus's approach. "You've been planning this for months." "My father is a civil rights attorney," Marcus explained. "He taught me that bullies like Madison only understand one thing: consequences that actually matter to them. Social pressure, peer disapproval, even academic consequences aren't enough when someone has her level of family influence. But legal liability, criminal charges, those get attention from people who can actually stop her." That morning, during first period, Principal Williams made an announcement over the school's intercom system. He informed students that the administration had become aware of serious cyberbullying incidents and that they would be conducting a comprehensive investigation. Any students with information about harassment, threats, or online defamation were encouraged to speak with counselors immediately. Sarah watched Madison's reaction carefully during the announcement. For the first time since their confrontation began, she saw genuine worry in the other girl's expression. Madison was smart enough to understand that official school involvement meant parental notification, permanent records, and potential legal consequences that her family's social status couldn't easily dismiss. During lunch, Sarah chose to sit at the same corner table where this had all begun. She wasn't hiding anymore, but she also wasn't looking for confrontation. She simply wanted to eat her sandwich in peace and see what developed. Madison appeared right on schedule, but this time she was alone. Her usual entourage was conspicuously absent, and her approach lacked the confident swagger she had displayed in previous encounters. She sat down across from Sarah without invitation, her carefully maintained composure showing visible cracks. "We need to talk," Madison said quietly. Sarah finished chewing her bite of sandwich before responding. "I'm listening." "This has gotten out of hand," Madison continued, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "People are taking things too seriously involving administrators and parents. It doesn't need to be like this." Sarah studied Madison's face, noting the combination of anger, frustration, and something that might have been fear. "What would you like it to be like?" "Look, maybe I came on a little strong when you first got here," Madison said, the words clearly difficult for her to admit. "But you have to understand, this school has a certain way of doing things, and when someone new comes in and disrupts that—" "By disrupts, you mean refuses to be intimidated by you," Sarah said calmly. Madison's jaw tightened, but she controlled her initial reaction. "Fine. Yes, students here know how to show proper respect to people who've earned their position. You didn't understand that." Sarah set down her sandwich and leaned forward slightly. "Madison, I've moved to 6 different schools in 4 years. I've seen this same dynamic everywhere I've gone. There's always someone who thinks they own the place and that new students need to prove themselves worthy of basic respect." "And how have you usually handled it?" "Usually I keep my head down, avoid conflict, and focus on graduating so I can move on with my life," Sarah admitted. "But I've realized something important here. When good people stay silent, bullies like you get to keep hurting other students. Marcus, David, probably dozens of others who've been too afraid to speak up." Madison's composure cracked completely. "You don't know anything about me or what I've had to deal with at this school. You think it's easy being in charge, having everyone expect you to solve their problems and maintain order?" For the first time, Sarah heard something genuine in Madison's voice, exhaustion and frustration that suggested her aggressive behavior might stem from her own insecurities and pressures. But she also recognized a classic manipulation tactic, the attempt to reframe bullying as leadership and victimization as responsibility. "Nobody asked you to be in charge of other students," Sarah replied firmly. "And maintaining order through fear and intimidation isn't leadership. It's tyranny." Before Madison could respond, Principal Williams approached their table, flanked by the school counselor and Marcus Chen. Students throughout the cafeteria noticed immediately, conversation stopping as everyone focused on the unfolding scene. "Miss Pierce, Miss Martinez," Principal Williams said formally, "I need to speak with both of you in my office immediately." The walk to the principal's office was silent and tense. Sarah felt calm and prepared. She had done nothing wrong and had evidence to support her actions. Madison, however, looked increasingly pale as the reality of her situation became clear. In the principal's office, Marcus presented his documentation methodically. Screenshots of Madison's fake social media posts about Sarah, evidence of similar campaigns against other students, witness statements from students who had been afraid to speak up previously, and even technical analysis showing how the fabricated content had been created. Principal Williams reviewed the evidence with growing seriousness. The cyberbullying policies at Lincoln High were clear and comprehensive, with consequences that included suspension, mandatory counseling, and referral to law enforcement for criminal charges when appropriate. "Miss Pierce," Principal Williams said finally, "this evidence suggests a pattern of systematic harassment that violates multiple school policies and potentially several state laws. Your parents have been contacted and are on their way to the school for an emergency meeting." Madison's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed completely. Tears began streaming down her face as she realized the full consequences of her actions were finally catching up with her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "It was just supposed to teach her to respect the social order here." Other new students understood their place, but she kept fighting back. Sarah felt a complicated mixture of emotions watching Madison break down. She didn't enjoy seeing anyone in pain, but she also knew that consequences were necessary to prevent future victims. "Miss Martinez," Principal Williams turned to Sarah, "I understand that you've been the target of this harassment, but I also want to commend you for handling the situation with remarkable maturity. Mr. Chen has explained how your willingness to stand up to Miss Pierce encouraged other students to come forward with their own experiences." The meeting concluded with Madison facing immediate suspension, pending a full investigation, mandatory counseling sessions, and the possibility of criminal charges depending on what the police investigation revealed. Her parents would be required to attend meetings with school administrators and potentially with the families of students she had targeted. As Sarah walked back to class, she was approached by students she had never spoken to before. They thanked her for standing up to Madison, shared their own stories of being intimidated or hurt by her tactics, and expressed relief that someone had finally held her accountable. David Kim found her after school as she was heading home. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "nobody expected someone to actually stand up to her and win. A lot of people here thought that was impossible." Sarah considered his words as they walked toward the school's exit. "I didn't win anything. I just refused to lose myself in someone else's game." Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at Lincoln High underwent a remarkable transformation. With Madison's intimidation tactics no longer threatening students into silence, people began forming friendships based on genuine common interests rather than fear-based hierarchies. Academic collaboration increased, social groups became more inclusive, and teachers reported improved classroom dynamics across multiple subjects. Marcus Chen became student body president in a special election, running on a platform of peer support and anti-bullying initiatives. He and Sarah worked together to establish a mentorship program for new students, ensuring that future transfers would have immediate allies and resources to help them navigate their transitions successfully. Madison returned to school after 2 weeks of suspension and court-mandated counseling sessions. She was required to make public apologies to her victims and perform community service as part of her legal settlement. The experience had clearly changed her. She was quieter, more thoughtful, and seemed to be genuinely working to understand the harm her actions had caused. Sarah found herself in an unexpected position of influence at Lincoln High, but she wielded it differently than Madison had. Instead of demanding respect through intimidation, she earned it by consistently standing up for students who were being mistreated and by refusing to tolerate bullying in any form. 3 months later, as Sarah sat in the same corner table where her conflict with Madison had begun, she reflected on how much had changed. The table was no longer isolated. Other students regularly joined her for lunch conversations about everything from homework help to college planning to social justice initiatives. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father, who was finally returning from his overseas deployment. "Heard from your mother about your first semester at Lincoln High. Proud of you for standing up for what's right, Mija. Can't wait to hear all about it when I get home." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Thanks, Dad. I remembered what you taught me about protecting others and standing up for principles, even when it's difficult. I think you'll like the friends I've made here." Looking around the cafeteria, Sarah realized that for the first time in her life, she didn't want to move when her mother's job inevitably required another relocation. She had found something at Lincoln High that she had never experienced before, a sense of belonging that came not from fitting in, but from being herself and encouraging others to do the same. Marcus approached her table with a lunch tray and a grin. "Ready for the student council meeting after school? We've got 3 new anti-bullying proposals to review." Sarah nodded, gathering her belongings as the lunch period ended. She had learned something important during her time at Lincoln High, that true strength wasn't about dominating others or avoiding conflict, but about using whatever power you possessed to make life better for people who couldn't protect themselves. As she walked toward her afternoon classes, Sarah fingered the dog tags beneath her shirt and silently thanked her father for preparing her not just to survive difficult situations, but to transform them into opportunities for positive change. The new girl who had been targeted for harassment had become a leader who created space for everyone to belong safely, and that transformation had made Lincoln High a better place for every student who walked its hallways.